Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the final session in our state sponsorship webinar series. Thank you for joining me today. I'm quite excited today because this is where it all comes together. And over the past 25 years here at Aspire Australia, we've helped thousands of clients find a way through the GSM maze to achieve their Aussie visa. And it's our mission to help you and guide you so that you can make the decisions that will help you achieve your golden ticket, your visa for Australia. I'm your guide and your migration superhero. And today we're going to go through a structured framework that will help you, I hope, make decisions about the next steps on your GSM journey. Before we get to the how, I always ask, what is your why? Knowing what your why is will help you focus, especially when the going gets tough, which it will do, and it will help you create a plan that meets your needs rather than someone else's needs. So I'd like you to think about this and make notes in a little notebook because you need to keep coming back to this as you go through the GSM process. So think about, what are your priorities? Is work a priority, getting a job here in Australia? Or is it about reuniting with family, or maybe even creating a future for your family in Australia? Do you have a time frame in which you want to work? Is earning money one of your priorities? And is being in a particular location one of your priorities? Jot these down. Of course, your priorities may change from time to time, but really be clear about what they are. And similarly, think about, what are your boundaries? Do you have a deadline that you need to keep in mind? Do you have a budget? And do you have flexibility or not in relation to where you might be located? Once you've considered your priorities and boundaries, then you can look at what your options are. And looking at the options, because you know what your priorities are, you'll be able to discard any of the options that don't fit in with your own framework. Next, what I suggest you do in your notebook is to audit your attributes. Now, you may know all of these, but write them down, because when you're looking at the state sponsorship options, you need to have those in front of you so you can compare your own attributes with what each state and territory is looking for. So do you have one or more occupation? What are your qualifications? Have you studied in Australia? If so, for how long? 1 year, 2 years? How much work experience do you have in your occupation? What other work experience do you have? Is it current or is it previous work experience? What is your current English language level? And what's your current point score? Now, once you've done this preparation work, you can start looking at the options. And we're going to look at Plan A and Plan B. So Plan A is where you are looking at your options now from exactly where you are at the moment, with your current attributes, your current location, and just starting with what you've got. Because too often people want to move on to Plan B without really considering what they already have and how they can use that to their best advantage. So under Plan A, and this will apply to people in Australia, what are the criteria for the state where you live? Is there a residence requirement, a work or job requirement? Do you need to have studied for a certain period of time, have a certain level of settlement funds, have a certain number of points? Be very clear about what those criteria are. If you're living in a metro area, then look at the requirements for that metro area. If you're living in a regional area, then there may be different criteria. So using the state sponsorship guide, you can look at what these criteria are. Then determine whether you meet them or not. You may have some ticks and some crosses. If you don't meet some of those criteria, excuse me, then identify where those gaps are and can you plug them? For example, if you're required to have proficient level of English, but at the moment you only have competent, is it within your ability to improve your English to meet the level required? And again, what is in your control and what is not? For example, you can work on improving your English language ability, but maybe you don't have much influence over obtaining a job offer. And it's also important to know for the state where you live, whether you can make an active application for state sponsorship or whether you passively need to wait for that state to invite you to apply. For example, New South Wales for the 190 visa, you cannot actively apply for that until you've been invited by New South Wales. Whereas for the ACT, when you're good and ready, you can actively make an application. So knowing this is important because if you're passively waiting for an invitation from a state to apply, that time frame is out of your control, and that's something to be aware of. So these are all the questions you need to ask and do your homework for looking at your eligibility currently and what you could do to plug the gaps to become eligible. And we're going to look at an example a bit later. Now compare that to Plan B, which is a start again strategy, meaning that you may need to move physically to a different area. You may need to be flexible in terms of the work or undertaking other activities such as studying or some other action. So under Plan B, let's say you're living in a metro area in one of the states, then you'll start by looking at the regional opportunities in that same state and looking at the opportunities in all the other states and territories of Australia. So we have 8 states and territories. We have 2 visas. Within those visas, some of the states have multiple streams. So there's a lot to review against, which again is where our state sponsorship guide will come in handy because you can use that as your blueprint to compare your current situation against the eligibility criteria. Again, when you look at those criteria, you will identify any gaps. For example, if you're living in New South Wales, but you're looking at the criteria for Australian Capital Territory, you will see that there is a residence requirement. So make a note, okay, for ACT, I would need to live and work there for 3 or 6 months. Because then once you have this list ready, you'll be able to judge which is the best option for you. And again, you'll look at what's in your control and what is not. So compare achieving better English results and moving. They're completely within your control, as is undertaking further study. But getting a job may not be within your control. Although there are, of course, activities you can take to try and get that job offer. Then you need to consider looking at those criteria for the different states and territories and the gaps. What are you prepared to do to fill the gap? Are you prepared to move to a particular location or not? And I would suggest then you have this quite large matrix and you give each opportunity a rating. And remember, you're also filtering this through your priorities and boundaries that we looked at earlier. So you might have 3 or 4 opportunities, rate them from 1 to 5. And this will be the opportunities you want to take first. Now, whether it's a Plan A or Plan B, there are some things to keep in mind. Don't leave things to the last minute. We often have clients come to us and say, my visa is expiring in a couple of months. What can I do? It's almost too late to take appropriate action at that time. Start planning early so that you know what's coming, what you can work on, and you can be ready to jump into opportunities as they become available. Also be aware of deadlines and time limits. For example, are your age points going to go up or down as you jump between brackets? Do you have a visa expiring? Are you eligible for the 485 visa because you've studied for 2 years or your study does not meet that requirement? And there are expiries of English language tests, skills assessments, and if you have your expression of interest lodged, then the actual expiry of the EOI itself. So you need to be aware of those deadlines. And again, I suggest you put that in your notebook or your diary. Also wanted to mention that you can only obtain a 485, that's the postgraduate study visa. You can only obtain that once per person as the primary applicant. So if you are a single person, then choosing when to apply for that visa is important. If you have a partner, then if you have obtained a 485 based on your study, your partner may be eligible for a 485 if he or she undertakes study. So you can get another opportunity to have 12, 18 or 24 months further period in Australia. And that 485 visa is a great tool to use to explore state sponsorship opportunities, to get work, to move locations, obviously for people who've studied in Australia. If you are thinking of extending your student visa, then remember the genuine temporary entrant criterion has to be met. So your intention is to undertake further studies, but then depart Australia. And also there are a number of other visas that you can look at to plug the gap in the time period between, for example, the end of your student or 485 visa and an opportunity and an invitation coming up for you in Skills Select, in the GSM Skills Select. So we have a lot of resources on our website and in our YouTube, Aspire Australia YouTube channel that talk about some of these visas. So feel free to access those. Now let's look at a couple of examples. In our previous sessions, we looked at accountants. So here's Maria. She is an accountant. She's here in Australia on a student visa, which is going to expire in 2 months. So she's recently graduated from her Master of Professional Accounting. She's obtained the skills assessment and submitted her expression of interest, and she's got 75 points. So we're going to look at Maria's Plan A and Plan B. Because she's currently living in Sydney, Maria's Plan A is to seek a New South Wales invitation. Now, as I said, the New South Wales 190 invitation is passive. You need to wait to be invited. So that's a little outside Maria's control at the moment. What she can do while she's waiting before her student visa expires is to improve her English score. She can look for a job, and otherwise she's waiting. Now, if she doesn't receive an invitation prior to her student visa expiry, she's going to have to do something else in order to stick with the Plan A. And that could be to apply for the postgraduate 485 visa, which will give her more time. And during the course of that visa, she could undertake the professional year. So she's improving her point score, which will help her with her skilled independent visa. But also if she is invited by New South Wales to apply, there is some selection based on point score. So her Plan A is to stay in New South Wales, and she's improving her score that will possibly give her opportunity for either the 189 or the 190 for New South Wales. But she's not resting on her laurels. She's also investigated a Plan B. So in Plan B, she's looking at interstate opportunities, and she's looking at ACT because it's geographically close by to Sydney. And her Plan B would be to apply for the 485 visa, maybe staying in Sydney, but looking for a job in ACT and moving there as soon as she gets a job opportunity so that she has access to the ACT nomination for permanent residence. Another Plan B she has in mind is for, again, getting the 485 visa and looking for work in South Australia. Not so attractive for her because she would need to spend 24 months, so basically the whole period of her 485 visa, working in Adelaide, or 12 months in a regional area in South Australia in order to be invited. So that will chew up a lot of her 485 visa, but she's thinking about that. She's also not against undertaking further studies. And her third option for Plan B is to enrol in a one-year MBA, which will complement her MPA, and do that in South Australia. And while she's studying in South Australia, look for work, which may then give her access to a 491 visa. And because in this Plan B, she's not already applied for the 485 visa, she's basically extending her student visa and changing location. After finishing her MBA, she can apply for the 485 visa and have that time to finish the work and to get a state sponsorship from South Australia. Now, of course, these can be mixed and matched, but she's got some clear pathways that she's looking at. Nicely for South Australia, the work experience can be part-time, so it could be undertaken. She could be working part-time as an accountant whilst doing her studies on the student visa. So Maria has a few opportunities and she's going to rate those and take action accordingly. Now let's meet Marco. He's also in Australia. He was an international student, now on the 485 visa. He's had that visa for a few months and his occupation is software engineer. So he's, that qualification should be a Master of IT, not MPA. He's done the professional year, but he's only got 65 points because he hasn't achieved highly for English, and he's located in Victoria. So Marco's Plan A is to stay in Victoria, and he's initially thinking about enhancing his opportunities for the skilled independent visa by increasing his score. He's got 16 months left on his visa, so he's got time to work on his English and to undertake the NAATI test, which could bring his score up to 90, which may be sufficient to be invited in the 189. While he's also in Victoria, he's looking for a job, and Marco is aware that Victoria will only sponsor if you're working in a target sector. So he's looking at those target sectors and filtering his job search accordingly. And we looked at those target sectors in our previous session. Now, Marco's Plan B is to relocate to New South Wales. So if he were unable to find a job and therefore be unable to achieve Victorian state sponsorship, he can relocate to New South Wales and try for a 190 sponsorship there. Now, while he's in New South Wales and still looking for a job because he's looking at developing his career, he's also looking for a job in the ACT. So whichever comes up first, he may move to the ACT to live and work and get an opportunity for the ACT 190 nomination. And simultaneously, he's also looking for work in South Australia. And he would only move there if he got a job offer, and he would need to complete a year in Adelaide or 6 months in a regional area. And he's got 16 months left on his visa, so if he can find a job offer soon, then he could meet the requirements for South Australia. Obviously, for ACT, he wouldn't need to spend as long, so that would be his preference if he can't get a job in either New South Wales or Victoria. So Marco again has Plan A and Plan B, and several options within Plan B. And he's going to rate those and make sure that the steps he takes as he goes forward just increases his opportunities without losing opportunities. Of course, if he doesn't get a job in Victoria, he's not going to be eligible for Victoria. So relocating to New South Wales is not reducing his opportunities. But he's aware that he wouldn't move to ACT or SA unless he had a job offer, because while sitting in New South Wales, he may be eligible for the 190. So both Marco and Maria have gone through the state sponsorship guide and really clearly understood what the requirements are generally and also specifically for their occupations. So let's recap how that all works. So the first step is to determine your priorities. What are you trying to achieve and when? And what are your boundaries? Then you're going to explore your options. You may need a big sheet of paper to do this, but you need to consider all the options now, and then you're going to rank your preferences. And the most important thing to do next is to then take action. It can be scary and it's a brave move to change your circumstances and maybe go for a Plan B, but if your Plan A is not going to work, then to achieve your goal, you must take action. Finding the right path can be difficult, and as we have already seen, here at Aspire Australia, our role is to guide you through the process to find the pathway that will best suit you and to make sure you understand all the criteria, the pros and cons, before you take your next step. I would love to help you find your pathway, and I invite you once again to book in for a consultation with me using that discount voucher, which will be valid till the end of August, and get some advice, talk through your options and find a pathway for your golden visa. We're always happy to help our clients achieve their goals when it comes to living and working in Australia, and I hope we can do the same for you too. Thank you so much for joining me for this series. I hope you have found it useful. Feel free to share all the links via YouTube with your friends so that they can get some information and help them on their journey as well. For the meantime, I wish you all the best and stay safe.